Good morning. We'll just jump in and get started. Welcome to CEO Blindspots, what only you can see and solve. I'm Catherine Grace, Director of Client Success at Behavioral Essentials. For those of you not familiar with Behavioral Essentials, we use the power of awareness to help you hire better and grow leaders and teams. Today, we'll be focusing on blind spotting. The book, Blindspotting: How to See What's Holding You Back as a Leader, provides a framework for understanding 6 types of blind spots. Behavioral Essentials and Marty Dubin, the author of Blindspotting, partnered to build a science-backed targeted performance model designed for senior-level leaders and executives that starts with the Blindspotting assessment and continues through individual and team coaching. We're excited for you to join us today as we have a candid conversation on prioritization, pressure, and what only the CEO can do. We'll spotlight the blind spots that derail even the most visionary leaders and how to navigate them with clarity. For this conversation, we'll be joined by Sean McNicholas, CEO of SSA Group, a second-generation family-owned enterprise with more than $500 million in annual revenue, over 10,000 employees, and operations across more than 90 locations nationwide. Alongside Sean will be Marty Dubin, PhD clinical psychologist, executive coach, and author of Blindspotting. Before we begin, just a few housekeeping notes. First, please feel free to drop any questions or comments you have in the chat. We'll try to get to all of them. Second, we'll provide a follow-up communication to everyone who registered, including the recording of today's session and the opportunity to take a blind spotting assessment. Also, we have additional webinars coming up. So we have one in December focused on blind spotting for HR leaders. We will also have a session in January where Marty will join us again for a session focused on identity. So now I'd like to introduce you to Behavioral Essentials Chief Operating Officer Jill McCauley, who will be moderating today's conversation with Sean and Marty.
Thank you, Catherine. Well, it is a delight to be here with you both. And it's really a special opportunity for us to have Marty bring the context of the framework, the theoretical underpinnings, and Sean, for you to talk about the pragmatic experience of going through blind spotting as an individual, and as you have talked about blind spotting and rolling it out to your company. So today, I want to start with Marty and have Marty walk our listeners through what is blind spotting and how does that framework resonate and apply to executive leaders?
So blind spotting is what we don't see about ourselves. And we're all self-aware to a certain extent, but we operate on a default, our default personality. We just do things, and sometimes, most of the time it works, but there are times when it isn't working. The situation has changed, and we're not always aware when that happens. Often other people are, and so blind spotting is helping people grab that sense of awareness of when their normal personality, normal way of responding, things they've learned about how to be a leader are for some reason not working in a particular point in a particular situation.
Thank you. Will you just give our listeners today an understanding of the self-awareness model and the 6 blind spot areas?
Sorry, just to interrupt for a moment, the video is blank at the moment.
Bear with us all.
So we'll work that out as we continue the conversation.
So go ahead, Marty.
It's hard to become self-aware. We're very complex, and so I've been a clinical psychologist as well as an executive coach, as well as a CEO, and wanted to find a way to kind of partial out our personality in ways that we can become aware of different aspects, because the blind spot show up in different ways in different areas. So there's 6 blind spot areas, common terms we're all pretty aware of, and they're organized about what can we change and what can't we change. And at the end of the day, there's 2 areas of these 6 where we can always make changes. One is our behavior. You know, if you're extroverted and you talk too much, you can just tell yourself not to talk so much in a particular meeting. You're not changing who you are at your core, but you are changing your behavior. And business is about how we show up. So if we show up differently, we can create a different outcome. The other one of the 6 areas is our identity. That's kind of the name tag we wear. It's the stories we write about ourselves with us as protagonists, who we are. And again, our identities change through life. And so we can realize where our identity may need to shift to become better aligned with what our job is, and then change that identity. And then the areas in the middle, the other four areas, the diagrams is around a circle, and the four areas in the middle that are much more difficult to change are our traits, our intellect, our emotions, and our motives, what drives us. We can change those to some extent, but we can always change how those all four show up in our behavior and in our identity.
Thank you. With that, Sean, as a CEO, in a moment in time where many companies are kind of cutting back financially, why was it important for you as an individual and you as a leader of an organization to keep investing in awareness and choosing to invest in the blind spotting framework?
Yeah, thanks, Jill. Well, first, big shout out to the SSA family listening and that will be interacting with this. I'm the luckiest leader on the face of this planet because I get to work with the best talent in the industry. And also any partners, and we're transforming the industry together. And so big shout out, big 452 hospitality shout out to that. The awareness journey actually for us started 10 years ago. And I met the Behavioral Essentials founder, Rick Braden, at a YPO event. And I was very intrigued about how cultures and behaviors interact for a business, and then how they also help you define your culture. So we go down this big kind of behavioral piece, and we're using the assessment, and we're working through self-awareness with all our people. And that was the kind of that light bulb for us as a company to use those as we hire, as we promote, as we coach, started getting into coaching. And then fast forward to about a year ago, we launched a big, bold vision called Destination 2030. And this is about the fourth, no, not about, it is the fourth vision that I've authored for the company. But there was this moment, Jill, where I was feeling like, something just isn't right, something's off. And it really was more self-reflective with me as the leader. It felt like I needed something. I wasn't seeing how I need to evolve as the CEO of what our current size is to where we're going as a company. There was more scrutiny. I felt a little more intensity. I felt some things like my team, my immediate team, looking at me with a very close microscope, seeing what Sean would do next. And what I realized is that I was holding things pretty tight. I was doing things that I thought were right for the company and for the culture. But now today, after I started working with Marty Dubin about 6 months ago, I know some of those things were holding us back.
You know, it's so interesting that, so many leaders have a vision, and they, I think, intuitively have a sense that they're ahead of everybody else.
Yeah.
And so that they've already changed. They don't need to change. Everybody else needs to catch up to them. And you had the awareness that even though you had the vision, you also needed to evolve as the company evolves.
Yeah.
So let's talk about some of those blind spots you have discovered. Would you share some of the blind spots that kind of have come to the forefront of your awareness in your work with Marty?
Yes, this is where it gets juicy. So, Jill, so with the framework that Marty's rolled out with Blindspotting, if you look at like motive and the three things, affiliation, achievement, and is it control power?
Yep.
Those three. So I test, or Marty would say that I'm imbalanced there. I can use those three when I need to use them effectively as leader. There are things like creative intellect that get me in trouble. And the downstream impact with a big, bold idea is something that Sean McNicholas does and was doing with no awareness to it. Like our favorite example is the Project Cabana. Can I share that really quick? So I'm with a client, and this is about 4 or 5 years ago, Jill, and we're evolving digitally. So our company is really leaning into digital and mobile and kiosk ordering and a digital transformation. And I'm with a client, and I said, well, how do you think you could use this technology? And she said, well, what about if we did cabanas? I'm like, wow, well, that would be interesting. So I went right to the first person in SSA that I found. I said, what if we did cabanas and you infuse technology and those kind of things? And they looked at me like I was speaking some foreign language. But because the CEO said it, this cabana thing started manifesting throughout the whole entire company. Fast forward 3 months, I'm in Cincinnati, and I look at somebody's screen and they have this thing on there. I said, well, what are you doing? Well, we're working on a design for a cabana. And I go, why are you doing that? And they go, well, we thought it was like the most important thing for you. So we spent probably hundreds and hundreds of hours company-wide, a lot of money on this project cabana, that all I was doing was just offering like an idea of where digital could be used, and wasn't like, this is what we need to do as a company. But it's a great example of the downstream impact, Marty, that you've kind of shared with.
Marty, are there other blind spots that Sean's still missing? Well, I think, Marty, I want to transition in the book for all of you who have the book, page 185. Sean loves to reference this. Marty, you bring forward this framework of what only a CEO can do. There are 5 things. And in that framework, you tailor your coaching to help the CEO understand what those 5 things are. Walk us through that framework, how you came to it, and how that applies to leaders.
You know, it really, well, I came to it probably 2 ways. One is there's a great article written by A.G. Lafley, the former CEO of Procter & Gamble. I think it's 2009 in HBR. And that's the title of his article, is What Can Only the CEO Do? Or What Only the CEO Can Do. And it was such like a riveting question when I thought about it as a CEO myself. And that's the second awareness. I was so aware, and I'm sure you've been aware of this, as a CEO, you have unlimited degrees of freedom of how you spend your time. I mean, there's really nobody saying you have to be in this meeting or you need to be here. You report to your board, but other than that, you do what you think is best. And so without some unifying principles about how to organize your time, it's easy for you to just get sucked up in whatever the demands are. And then later say, really? Should I have spent 100 hours on that or not? So I started thinking about what are the things that only the CEO can do. And the concept here is that if there's a box, this applies to any other role in the company. If there's a box on the chart, on the org chart, it should mean that there's something only that box can do. Otherwise, why do you need the box? So the 5 things that I think only the CEO can do is only they can hire and fire their team. If they've kind of delegated that to HR, find me a CFO, and they just kind of review the final candidate, maybe they're not really owning that part. And so only they can do that. And so they need to surround themselves with people that fit their strengths and their gaps and fit the org design and where the company's going. A lot of thought goes into that. And when I worked as a consultant with big companies, a new CEO would come in. It really means that the team needs to change because it's a different person. The second is the CEO owns the strategy. Clearly, they work on strategy with the board and senior leaders. But at the end of the day, it's their bet on 2030 vision of where things are going. And they need to fully own it and be in it with all their heart and soul. The third is the annual priorities. They need to champion those and be so clear about what we do and what we don't do. And those are those choices about where resources happen on a short and medium term basis. They also need to own and champion the culture. It doesn't necessarily mean they're thinking of culture initiatives all the time. They have other people help with that, but everybody looks to the CEO and to other leaders for guidelines on how does this company really work? What should we do and what shouldn't we do? And you are in a fishbowl as a senior leader, and everybody's looking all the time at your behavior and modeling after that. And so being very clear about that, and just once a week, ask yourself, what did I do for culture, and where was I on target and off target for culture? And the final one is there are certain relationships, certain people only want to talk to the CEO. And Sean and I have talked about this. He was like, darn, I've got these people on my list, and I know they can talk to me, but I haven't reached out to this major customer in probably 6 or 9 months, when normally I'm talking to them every 3 or 4 months. And so identifying, having that list, having their admin help them think about, have you touched base? Do you own these relationships? So those key, and we can talk more. We've had some great discussions about how to implement that within the organization.
Yeah.
So talk about, since Marty's brought that framework into your awareness, Sean,
Yeah.
what have been some of the lessons learned? Have you learned that you were doing things you shouldn't do? And what are some of those 5 things that are most consistently challenging for you to implement as CEO?
Sure. Well, I'm out there preaching page 185. When I started working with Marty 6 months ago, that was the aha thing, the thing that I needed, that I was feeling. Remember a few minutes ago, I shared, I was feeling this. There's something I'm missing to evolve to become the CEO that this company needs and what I want to be. And this is it, page 185. And so when I think through all of that, I'm like, okay, set the team, be the champion of the vision, own the priorities, own the culture, and then own the relationships. And that became the new mantra of the CEO for Destination 2030. And we are starting to talk about how do we use that framework and how does that help the key executives, my team, and the senior leadership of SSA as we move forward. Should I share the grades? The grades you gave me on those 5 things?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Your team wants to know.
Number 1, hire and fire your senior team. Set your senior team. I got a C. I don't get C's. So that was a nice awareness moment by my coach. Number 2, set the vision. I get an A+. Number 3, annual champion of priorities, A-. Own the culture. Number 4, I get a B. And the reason why I get a B is I was starting to look at having an open door policy was a super important piece of our culture. And I was having meetings with anybody and everybody. And what Marty called out was, Sean, is that what only the CEO should be doing? Is that the best use of your time? And then the 3rd is own the key relationships. And gave me a B+. Yeah, I need to reshuffle the deck a little bit.
More diligence. More discipline.
More discipline. Yeah.
Wonderful. Has the team, your executive leadership team underneath you, felt a new awareness of what their workload is compared to your workload, since we've talked about this model helping the other executives understand what only they can do?
Yeah, I think those listening, we've all been to a sporting event or a marathon or a cultural festival or some type of music bowl or a county fair. And there's always somebody with like a biblical reference, like John 3:16 or something like that. Well, that's me, page 185. I'm holding that up around the whole entire company because prioritization is that piece, Marty, that I know we're missing as a company, because we're spread out across the country now. We have some international pieces. We're looking at taking our partnerships and expanding our revenue opportunities with them. So that becomes a lot of moving pieces. Well, with that, we haven't really figured out how we're going to prioritize. And so then when my COO or the COO, Travis, best in the industry, we start working on his priorities for the year. He says, here they are, but are they really what only Travis can do? And how does that align with what only the CEO can do? And that's where we're at. So Marty's working on a framework on how to help me with my senior team and use those what are only that individual can do.
I'm super excited about this. This is, to me, kind of making theory alive in a company. And it pushed me in my thinking about, I mean, I know how to work on that with Sean, but what does that really mean, as your question is about how to work out with a company? So Travis has 2 jobs in my mind around these priorities. He's got, as Sean said, what are his 5, those 5 priorities still fit for him. He defines them a little differently than Sean would based on his role. But then he also, as Sean's first follower, if you will, he's got to help Sean with his 5. So he's got to not only think, how do I help Sean execute on his 5, and then how do I do my 5? And then that cascading approach is what we're beginning to introduce.
That's very helpful. So in the book, you bring up the identity blind spot area. identity also informs your prioritization depending on what label you put on yourself. And so as a CEO, Marty, you talk about that as a business grows, the CEO's identity and perhaps what name tag they're wearing might change. Talk to us about the various roles a CEO must kind of wear and when they have to take on a new name tag and take off an old name tag.
Yeah, so the blind spot with identity happens when you shift roles. And for Sean, it's shift to the next vision of where the company is. What, as he said, what does he need to evolve to do that? So that's his shift. But anybody that moves up a role in a company or shifts they need to begin to think about, my identity was linked to my previous job. That's why I did so well, and that's why I got promoted. Now my identity needs to shift and change. I'm no longer a subject matter expert. Now I'm a supervisor or a manager. I'm no longer a VP. I'm a senior VP or an EVP. I need to be thinking about corporate priorities, not just my function. And at each of those, you're rewriting your name tag. And most of us don't think about that in terms of the transition. There's a psychological transition. If that previous identity fit you well and you were successful, you should probably feel some sense of loss about that. I know you enjoyed the open door policy. You got something out of that as well. And so we've talked about it. He said, damn, there's a grief and loss here of I can't make people feel so wonderful anymore that they have open access to me as much as I did before. This is a different kind of approach. Yeah. So at each of those, there's that psychological process of how do I need to realign my identity to fit with where my role is and where it's going.
Talk a little bit more, Marty, for a CEO in particular, as the stages of a business evolves, startup to sustaining to growth, how that CEO identity also evolves.
Yeah. So I did a lot of work in Silicon Valley with early stage companies, and they were founded by super creative people like Sean, and their identity was around this innovation and creativity, just like Sean still has that part of his identity. And those innovators always will have that part of their identity. But once the company, once their product and market fit starts to happen and the investors start to get excited that, oh my God, we're going to make money on this one, they now need to actually build a business. They need to learn about supply chain and marketing and all sorts of things that they may or may not find interesting. But that is their new identity. Not that innovator goes away, but it starts to drop down a step or two, and it isn't the primary one all the time. And then once they have a thriving business and it's sustainable, then it really moves to being a leader and thinking about much more longer term kinds of things. And for Sean, interested to hear his comment, but going from where they are now at 500 million to where they want to be at $1 billion in 5 years, what does a CEO of that size company look like in Sean's mind? What does he look like there versus what he does and how he spends his time at the size the company is now? So each of those has a psychological transition. There's the preparation for it, starting to kind of put on the clothes of what does that look like, and then let go of some of the old and fully inhabit the new.
Sean, talk to us about your journey, because the company hasn't just been at this 500 million marker your entire time, right? It was at a very different revenue marker when you started, and how has your identity shifted over time, both reflectively, and how do you see that shifting going forward?
Yeah, fortunately, luck is one of our values as a business, and fortunately, we're 10x the size that we were when we kind of assumed the leadership with an amazing team around me, and we started scaling pretty fast. And what I realized is back then, one of the consistencies has been relationships. That has been a consistent factor all the way through. But what I've also learned through Blindspotting is that some of the characteristics of me as a leader, like taking risks, were important and continue to be important, but I don't need to absolutely take it to the edge every time. And so there has to be some type of evolution in those behaviors, in those characteristics as a leader. Now, what I do like about the 5 things is I use those now. We have a board now. We didn't in the past, so that's part of the evolution of the business. And how I report to the board is based on those 5 things. When I talk to my team, instead of having the newest idea every time I talk to the team and the downstream impact there, Marty, it's here's the 5 things I'm focused on. Here's how we can align together so that we make sure that we take care of our partners and we hit destination 2030. And the last thing I will say, since I'm very Irish and love to tell stories, is we have a great team in Hawaii. And Russ and Arian make this dynamic duo. We've been very successful with the cultural attractions in Hawaii. And I was recently out there and I was sitting down with Russ having a cup of coffee. And what I realized is Russ was transitioning the key relationships to others. And that is what he is the best at. And so I'm like, Russ, what the heck are you doing? I actually was that blunt. You'd be proud of me. And he said, I thought that's what we're supposed to do. So here we are as a business reinforcing that he should be transitioning all these things that he's amazing at. And so we recalibrated that, we rethought that and said, Russ, for us to continue to be successful on the islands, you have to own the key relationships. That is your magic. And now we just won another new partnership out there. Coincidence? I don't think so.
I want to pick up on your comment about your risk taking, because that's a super strength of Sean's, and it is definitely part of the ingredients of how the company has grown. And it also is a blind spot because he can overdo his risk taking in other people's eyes. And we've been working on him being able to be aware of other people's comfort zone around risk and their reaction to his comfort zone around risk. And sometimes they're putting on the brakes because they think he's going to go way too far. And he already knows where he's going to stop, but he has to be able to communicate that with them. So otherwise there becomes this dynamic that is unspoken where he's pushing and they're pulling back, and he's pushing and they're pulling back. And it's like, wait a minute, we can have an open conversation and I can talk about my risk taking and comfort, and we don't have to play this game with each other anymore.
That's very helpful. Marty, go back to your earlier comment about, actually, I want to go to Sean first.
No.
Have there been any identities that you've had to truly walk away from besides the open, I know you mentioned open door, but other identities where you've had to grieve over, I'm no longer that role?
You have to answer that for me.
Yeah, I can think of I don't know if it's an identity. Well, I think it is an identity.
Okay.
But I think we approached it more as a strength that tips over and becomes too much. I mean, you can see Sean's passion, and his passion for delighting customers is the center point of 452. And he immediately goes there all the time. And that's his relationships. Well, no surprise that he's not the best at really making people uncomfortable or giving them some really tough feedback, because he doesn't like people to be unhappy and uncomfortable.
Very true.
So the change has been, and he's told me some great stories you may want to share, where he said, Marty, you won't believe it. I was about ready to delight this person, and instead I just didn't say anything and let the silence make for the discomfort of the other person, that one of his direct reports, or I think it was further down the line. And that's a strength. That's something that, another part of the culture, that there needs to be a culture here of accountability.
Yeah.
And a culture of responsibility around meeting your goals. And if Sean's just this nice guy all the time that just is delighting people, then it's hard for that culture to really get hold within the company.
Yeah, Jill, and what Marty didn't say is after I gave this direct feedback to the individual and didn't please them, I ran and found a brown paper bag. I was like,
Well, just
progress.
elaborate on how you, Marty, when in other circumstances, not only with Sean, you've helped a CEO realize they have an identity that no longer serves them. How do you, as a coach, and what tools do you give them to help them navigate that grief?
Well, at first it's, I don't know where it's going to end up. I mean, the person may say, you know what? I really liked my previous job. I really liked my previous identity. I am an innovator. I'm great at the first stage of startup companies. I really don't want to build businesses here. I'm bored by these other things. I'm not going to be a good leader. And giving the space for that conversation to happen, and the openness around it it's hugely liberating because, especially in startup founders where there's a lot of money, other people's money you're spending, the last thing you want to say is, maybe I want to hit the stop button rather than, put, the accelerator to the floor.
Yeah.
So those discussions have been really interesting, and people trying to figure out how do they change their identity and still stay true to who they are. And maybe in that business builder example, they're like, I just need to have a super good operational person around me right now, even though the board doesn't think I need a COO. But I know I'm not going to fulfill all these operational details that I'm not that interested in. And I need to hire this person now for me to be able to continue to evolve.
Understood. Well, Sean, as you reflect on your own journey and the impacts, let's talk a bit more about blind spotting and building a culture of awareness here at SSA. How are you intentionally bringing forward blind spotting and this greater culture of awareness here?
So one, we now have all the books all over the place. So you can't walk into an SSA office and not see the book. Two, Travis and I, so our COO, he and I are really thinking through, with Marty's help, Braden's help at Behavioral Essentials too, really thinking through how do I take those 5 things and how do we work together on that to get complete alignment so that we're dancing. And then our whole senior team dancing together. That's the key, alignment and prioritization for Destination 2030. And the third piece, Jill's coaching. I'm so grateful that I get to work with some amazing coaches, and I have a championship coach. We're going to win the championship every year, Coach Captain. And now Travis is talking about coaching. Tara's talking about coaching, and all the coaching that is happening, because you could read the book and it's fantastic. And can you cut out page 185? Is that okay if people tear that out of the book? You can have and carry page 185 around with you, but you need a coach to help identify those areas that you're not seeing, and how are you going to change. So we are doing that, and we're evolving it and building this framework kind of real time for SSA, because now I know and see the gift that I got, and I want that gift for everybody else, all the leaders of SSA, because I truly know that we're a remarkable company. I know where we're going. I know we're going to transform the industry. I know we're going to help all our partners. But we have to have a team that knows exactly what that looks like, and we're completely aligned on that. And that's where Blindspotting is at SSA.
There's an example of owning the culture right there. Sean knew it started with him. It started with him talking about his blind spots. It started with him talking about how he has to evolve, and going first and setting that sense of culture that, hey, it's okay to talk about we're not perfect, and we all have blind spots, and we all have ways that we need to evolve and change. And that kind of culture of openness around that, a culture of feedback around that, is huge to be able to, really start all the mechanics of the organization making these kind of cultural changes.
To that point, Sean, why don't you talk a little bit about the investment the executive leadership team underneath you has done around blind spotting, and how I think you have mentioned that blind spotting has been, even the concept or the verbiage of blind spots is now part of their regular routine.
Yeah, well, one example happened yesterday, and we were talking about relationships. And as we grow, how do we maintain that high level of customer touching and success? And we were starting to get a little structured, which is okay. I'm looking at how are you proud of me?
I am.
But the comment was, Sean, what language are you using? And I'm like, own the relationship. That's just the word I'm going to use, own the relationship, because that's what I believe in. That's what I'm talking about. So that is the word we're going to use. Who's the ownership of that relationship? Because that's one. Two, we did an executive retreat and we did Blindspotting. And we started to open up about here's some things that our leadership see and don't see, and how do we as a team help hold them accountable on this. So that was really fascinating. So we did that in July. You helped us out with that. And then moving forward, we're going to continue to invest in coaches for our company, for our leaders, so that we're prioritizing the right things.
So then, Marty, as we kind of wrap up our time here today, when you see a CEO and his or her executive team leaning into their own blind spots and building this culture of awareness, what have you seen? What do you see as the business outcomes, the organizational outcomes from that work?
I want to go back to that point about kind of developing language within the company and these very short things, because everybody's got enough to do already. Adding on blind spotting, cultural change is just one more thing on a stack of a lot of things. And so having it to be very clear and distinct and very, very defined is really important. So it is important for everybody to have their own individual goal that they're working on in terms of their own particular blind spot, and for there to be a team or a company one. So if a team one for right now is own the relationship, and we're going to be working on that one for the next 3 months or something until we're all feeling good about that, then we can add the next one. And so it's this iterative, very small tweaks, small changes that have huge effect, and that you can see the downstream positive effect of it, and then go on to the other. So, it's taking 10% of your brain away from all your other activities and adding this one piece in there. So it's really important not to overdo this, not talking about transformation. We're talking about small changes that we can do in a piecemeal kind of way. Just like you do a diet or you go to the gym, all those things are just small changes that build over time.
And what's the outcome of that over time?
Well, they're tied to the overall priorities of the company. So, it's whatever those financial measures are in terms of hitting the financial goals and all the steps in between to reach their 2030 goal. They all should be aligned to that. Owning the relationships, everybody should see how that leads to, increased top line revenue, increased stickiness of customers, all of that.
Yeah.
Well, wonderful. Catherine, I turn it back to you. Are there any questions in the chat or from our attendees? You're muted.
At the moment, there's no questions, but please, everybody, drop a message or drop a question in the chat and we'll read it out for Sean or Marty. You're also welcome to come off mute if you'd like and just ask your question that way.
I'll go. So this isn't as much of a question as something kind of awesome that occurred maybe 4 days ago. So I'm at an appointment. I'm in the lobby in the waiting room. They got their magazine rack, and I see this entrepreneur magazine. And it's a bit of a provocative cover, Leadership Unfiltered. So I'm sitting there, and here we go. When your superpowers become your blind spots, Marty Dubin. 6 pages in Entrepreneur. I had never even seen it. And the lady in the office is like, "Isn't that your company?" I'm like, "Yeah, kind of." Oh, awesome, Marty. Sean, for making this happen. I'm just seeing it, feeling it, and the addition of blind spotting to all the other phenomenal, really, initiatives that SSA under Sean's leadership has done. It really is, I think, more than anything, obviously in a business, you have to be profitable to have that business, but it's not profit just for profit's sake. It's what you do with it, what you do with it. And that starts to get into that realm of legacy. And I know with 100% certainty that the investment that's been consistent and continued now for more than 10 years from Sean is all about developing and growing people. So taking advantage of these resources, I don't know many companies who offer them at the level Sean does. I'm not sure I know of any. And so over time, just like Marty said, it's these little tweaks, this little, what's holding me back? I'm reminded very quickly, and I'll be quiet. I saw this some time ago with McNicholas. So he was at the time was by far the most successful golfer. And I think in terms of tournaments and majors won, he's still number one. But he was the first person to have a psychologist or a performance coach with him when nobody did that. And I remember the interview saying, there was an interview with somebody, I think it was from Wide World of Sports, saying, you're so far beyond everybody else in terms of your success. Why in the world would you have a performance coach? And he had one line that was exactly what we're talking about here. And the one line was, I can't see my backswing. Love that blind spots are just part of life. I can't see behind me right now. And if I have somebody who cares about me, who loves me, that can see it and is going to have the courage and the compassion to point that out and put me on a better direction to achieve my personal goals, which are aligned with the corporate goals, we've just got a winner. And then it's the sustained effort over time, just like all things. Without the sustained effort over time, you're not going to get good at anything. So I'm thrilled, man. I'm so happy to be here and be a part of this whole thing. Marty's calling it a movement, and I'm moving, baby. That's it.
Any other comments or questions? We have a quiet group today. I guess we've answered them all in the course of the conversation today. Any closing thoughts, Sean, Marty, Jill?
The other night I was in Houston and we were at called a client gala, and we had 4 other partners with us. And on the way out, of course, we hospitality, 452 hospitality, making people feel good. Love the 452 hat, Rick. And on the way out, our partner at the Dallas Zoo, Lisa New, said the 5 things, Sean, right? I said 5 things left.
Any closing thoughts for you?
I love that, right? I mean, it's not more, it's less, right? Just 5. Stick with them. We don't have to talk about a whole bunch of other things, but it's easy to write 1 page in the book, but all the elaboration, all the things you're doing to kind of make it come alive and what the real meaning is in all of that. I'm just excited about what the discovery ahead is going to be about all that.
Absolutely. Well, thank you both for a wonderful discussion. Thank you all for joining us. And that is a wrap today.
Thank you, Jill.
Yeah, thank you. Good job.
Thank you.